Good morning, everybody. If you'll go ahead and open up your Bibles to Exodus 32, please. Exodus 32. I really enjoy teaching my girls Bible stories and watching them begin to retain information. It's been a wonderful thing as a young father to see. And one of the good parts for me is, as much as I remember these Bible class stories, these Bible stories, there's a whole lot there that I completely forget was there. And so there's a lot in these stories that as we get older and as we mature, we just understand a lot more about what is going on. And they're just so rich and they have so much depth. And today I want to go through what might be one of those Bible class stories, one of those kids' stories, but has a whole lot for all of us the older we get and the more we mature. So, Exodus 32, we're going to talk about the golden calf, the golden calf. And the context here is just so important in Exodus 32. The context is so important. So think about all the things that the children of Israel have seen, all the things that they've experienced up to this point. God led them out of Egypt after 10 miraculous plagues fell on some of them just on the Egyptians and not the people of Israel. God led them through the Reed Sea or the Red Sea miraculously on dry ground, and then miraculously closed the water back on the Egyptians and saved them. God miraculously provides manna. He provides water. He provides quail in places where it makes no sense for those things to be. And God miraculously is doing all of these things over and over and over again. So by the time we get to Exodus 19 at Mount Sinai, God's glory and his presence comes down on the mountain, and there's thunder, there's lightning, there's earthquakes, there's clouds, thick darkness, there's trumpets that are so loud. And then God himself speaks the 10 commandments to all of the people. All of the people hear the voice of God. And it's so glorious and awesome and powerful that they beg Moses, don't let him talk to us. If he talks to us anymore, we're going to die. And if that weren't enough, in Exodus 24, Moses, Nadab, and Abihu, Aaron, and 70 elders of the people get to go on that mountain. And what do they see on the mountain? They see God on the mountain. And they eat this fellowship meal with him. And so then at the end of Exodus 24, God calls Moses to the very top of the mountain because he's going to receive more of the law at the end of Exodus 24. And Moses specifically leaves Aaron and a man named Hur in charge of the people. He says, if there's any dispute in the camp, you all take care of it. And Moses goes up to the top of the mountain to receive the rest of the law. And in Exodus 24 and verse 18, it says that Moses was there for 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and 40 nights. And to the people at the base of the mountain looking up, the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire. That's what it looked like to them. And so what we're going to read in Exodus 32 is what happens while Moses is up at the top of the mountain with God for those 40 days and 40 nights. And so here in Exodus 32, that context is going to be so important. All the things the Israelites have seen, what they've experienced, and what they've heard with their own ears. And that's where we get to here. So let's read the first 6 verses, please. First 6 verses of Exodus 32. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god. Your translation might say, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. Aaron said to them, tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. Then all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Now, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast day to the Lord. So the next day they rose early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and they rose up to play. So remember, Moses was gone for 40 days and 40 nights. It's almost a month and a half that Moses is gone. And one of the things that I have a question about that I really couldn't find an answer for was the glory of God at the top of the mountain that looked like a consuming fire. Was that glorious presence there throughout the 40 days or not? I really don't know. Because if the glory is still there while they're doing these things, then that makes this even worse. But if God's glorious presence is not there anymore in the same way, then maybe we can get into the minds of these people and see why they forget about the God who had done so much up to this point. I'm really not sure about that. But what we do see here is that the people surround Aaron and they say, make us a god, or make for us gods to go before us. And I think right away we see the heart of the people. Notice they don't ask, make us an image of the one true God, Yahweh. That's not what they asked for. They said, make us a god, or they said, make us gods who will go before us. They're not asking, hey, make us an image that we're going to devote to the one true God, Yahweh. They say, make us a god, make us gods to go before us. And I really think that they have forgotten so much about the Lord that they had just made a covenant with, that they had just experienced so many things from and seen so many wonders. And they say, as for this Moses, that could be a condescending way to say this. As for this Moses, it could be, we see that there's a clash between Moses and the people a lot leading up to this point. So maybe it's condescending, but they say, as for this Moses who brought us out from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. And I think it's interesting that they phrase it this way. They say, Moses is the one who brought us up out of the land of Egypt. Now, was it really Moses who brought them out of the land of Egypt? No, not really. It was actually God. Without God, none of this happens. Moses was just the person that God chose to actually lead them out. But really, Moses isn't the one who led them out. So they want gods to go before them. And they are saying this Moses is the one who led them out of Egypt, although it was actually God who did this. And so by asking for gods to go before them, they are breaking the first commandment that God had already spoken to all of them. They're breaking the very first one. And then by saying, make us a god, in other words, an image or images of gods, they're breaking the second commandment that God had just spoken to them. They are breaking number 1 and number 2. And we don't know exactly how many days, but 40 days after Moses had gone up there in the consuming fire of the Lord, 40 days. It doesn't take long. Well, Aaron has this opportunity here. The people are surrounding him. They say, make us gods who will go before us. We don't know what happened to Moses. He has an opportunity to shut this down right now. If you remember Exodus 24, God left Aaron and a man named Hur in charge of the people. He said, you settle any disputes that might come up. So he has an opportunity to squash this whole thing where it is, but he doesn't do that. And he might be fearing for his life here. We've seen in the past and previous things here where the people grumble against Moses, and Moses says, they're going to kill me if I don't give them the things that they need. And he prays to God. And so Aaron may very well be fearing for his life as they surround him and they say, make us gods who will go before us. And so what he does is he says, give me the gold rings in your ears, likely spoil from Egypt. He takes those gold rings, and in verse 4, this is a very important detail for us. In verse 4, it says that Aaron took the gold and he fashioned it with a graving tool. That's going to be a really important detail for us later. He fashioned it with a graving tool. Aaron had to do some work. He had to do some labor to do this. Your translation might say molten calf. And so he might have rough cast it in gold, which would have taken some time to do, and then fashioned it with this engraving tool. It took time, it took effort, it took work to make this. It could have been wooden and then overlaid with gold. We don't know exactly how it was, but either way it was created, it took work to make this thing. He had to spend some time fashioning and graving out this calf. And that's going to be really important for us. And notice in verse 4, the people say, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. They are applying the work of Yahweh to this golden calf. That is blasphemy. Just as plain and simple as it gets. This is blasphemy and a direct violation of the commandment of God to make an image or to worship images. They're applying the work of Yahweh to a lifeless idol that Aaron had just made. And if that's not bad enough, have you ever wondered why a calf? Yeah, why of all things would you pick a calf? The word there is likely actually a young bull in its strength, a young bull in its strength. And unfortunately, there are themes of bull worship to false gods in Egypt and in the Canaanite region that they were traveling through. In Egypt, there was a false god Apis and Baal, or Baal, however you want to say it, in the Canaanite region. And sometimes the bulls themselves were worshiped as a symbol of strength and power and futility. But other times it was a false god who was viewed to be riding on the bull or who was enthroned above the bull. And so they were worshiping a false god. But either way, they are taking these practices that they've seen in Egypt that are happening in the Canaanite region, and they are applying it to the one true God, Yahweh. They might even have good intentions about this. We're going to notice that in just a second here. But they're taking things that they see around them or have seen, and they're applying it to the one true God, Yahweh, in an unauthorized manner that God has not said is okay. And that's blasphemy. Not only does he create this bull, but verse 5, Aaron builds an altar before it. Did you see that in verse 5? He builds an altar before it, and he says, tomorrow will be a feast day to Yahweh. So Aaron may very well be thinking, okay, the people are asking for false gods, so I'm going to use this and try to direct them toward the one true God. Because in verse 5, if you notice the word Lord is in all caps, that's because it's Yahweh. It's the name of God. So Aaron may very well be thinking, okay, we're going to direct this toward the one true God. The problem is the people likely don't understand that. They're doing things that are coming from Egypt and the Canaanite region that God had told them not to do. They're breaking the first and second commandments. And then Aaron is announcing this unauthorized feast day when God has already told them about the feast days that they were to observe. So there are so many problems with what's happening, even if Aaron has good intentions or has intentions of directing this toward the one true God, it's not a good situation. No matter what's going on, there's all kinds of things that are unauthorized. So the next day, they offer burnt offerings and they offer peace offerings. Hey, that's great. Burnt offerings, peace offerings, those are good things. The problem is, again, it's an unauthorized day. It's before an unauthorized molten image on an unauthorized altar that God never told them that they should do this. And then the people eat, they drink, and they rise to play. And now your translation might not say they rose to play, and I think that's a really poor translation. It might say that they rose up to indulge in revelry or to indulge in partying. And I actually think those are better translations, because if this bull worship is related to the Egyptian bull gods or the Canaanite region bull worship, then this could likely be licentious sexual behavior that's taking place here. And so it is altogether completely denied by God. Things that he has revealed would show us that he thoroughly rejects these things. So it only takes 40 days for these people who had seen God work wonders before their very eyes, that they had experienced, they heard the voice of God. Some of them even saw the form of God on the mountain, and they rejected him because they grew impatient and they wanted to create their own way. They directly broke the first two commandments here in this section, and they had even heard God's voice. And think about Aaron specifically. Aaron was one of the men on the mountain who saw God on the mountain, and Moses left him in charge to handle disputes. And this is where he has led them in this direction. Well, let's keep reading. Let's see what God's response to this is. Verse 7, please. Verse 7. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, go down at once, for your people, whom you brought up from the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf and have worshipped it and have sacrificed to it and said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. Now then, let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation. So the Lord here, he tells Moses, you go down at once because of what the people are doing. And notice with me the possessive adjectives. If there's any English people, I could have that completely wrong. But notice the adjectives that are used here. He doesn't say, go down to my people who I led out of Egypt. He says, go down to your people whom you led out of Egypt. It kind of makes me think, if you're a parent and your kid's doing something you don't like, look what your daughter's doing. Look what your son's doing, you know? And that's sort of what he's doing. He's disowning them by his language because of what they're doing. Go down to your people that you've led out of Egypt because they have corrupted themselves. In verse 8. In verse 9, it says they're an obstinate people. And that word for obstinate there literally means stiff-necked. And the image is a horse or an ox that won't respond to you pulling on the rope. And I think that's so ironic in this section because they are worshiping before this young bull, this calf, that's an image of strength and power, and God is condemning them for acting like an ox that won't respond to the rope pulls. So what they're glorifying, God is condemning. I just think that's really ironic and interesting. And it's really important here. God says in verse 10, let me alone so that my anger can burn against them and destroy them. These people have committed blasphemy. They haven't treated God as holy. They have directly broken the first two commandments. And God says, leave me alone. I'm going to wipe them out. And then notice the last little bit there in verse 10, and I will make of you, Moses, a great nation. So those promises that were to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, he's saying, I'm going to wipe these people out, and I'm going to make those things come true through you and your line. And I'll just tell you, if I'm Moses, okay, I've had a lot of run-ins with these people. They've been annoying to me. They've been very complaining people. And so, all right, let's do this. They're doing that. So let's make these promises happen through me. But we'll see that Moses is a much better man than I am. And he reveals his heart. So let's keep reading. Look at verse 11. Verse 11, please. Then Moses entreated the Lord his God. Your version might say implored the Lord his God and said, "Oh Lord, why does your anger burn against your people whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak, saying, with evil intent, he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to destroy them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and change your mind about doing harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants to whom you swore by yourself and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, and all this land which I've spoken, I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever." So here, Moses entreats the Lord, or he sought the Lord's favor, or he implored God. And notice how Moses gives all the glory and all the possession back to God. God had just said, go down to your people whom you've led out of Egypt. But Moses says, don't let your anger burn against your people whom you led out with a mighty hand and a strong arm. Moses realizes what the people don't. They've just been saying, make us gods who will go before us. And they say, this is the God who brought you out of Egypt, applying it to this molten image of a calf. And Moses understands, no. Without Yahweh, none of this happens. Without him, not one thing that has happened so far would have happened. So he gives all glory and possession back to God. And Moses entreats God to think of the evil thoughts of the Egyptians. Moses is not worried about receiving a great nation himself. Moses is worried about God's reputation among the nations. And that's an amazing thing about Moses here. He's more worried about, well, the Egyptians are going to say you took them out of Egypt just so you could kill them in the mountains. That's what they're going to say about you if you do this. And your reputation is too holy and too important for that to happen. So think about that. And then furthermore, he adds that not only is he worried about the reputation, but he asks for God's burning anger to go away and to relent from wiping them out. And Moses entreats God on the basis of his promises. He says, okay, remember Abraham, remember Isaac, remember Jacob, remember those promises. And he's imploring God on his character not to wipe out the people. So then a thought that we need to have, or a question we should have here is, would God be completely just and justified to wipe the people out at this point? From a human standpoint, we'd probably say, no, they can turn it around. But from the holiness standpoint that Kevin just talked about in the Lord's Supper talk, God would be absolutely just and justified to wipe these people out for their sins. Remember, they had just committed to a covenant with the Lord, and they had just immediately broken that covenant. God is under no obligation to keep his end of the covenant because the covenant's broken. He would be completely just to wipe these people out. But let's see God's response as a result of Moses' entreaty and his pleading out to God. Look at verse 14, please. Verse 14. So the Lord changed his mind about the harm which he said he would do to his people. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides. They were written on one side and the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets. Now, when Joshua heard the sound of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there's a sound of war in the camp. But he said, it is not the sound of the cry of triumph, nor is it the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. So here it says the Lord changed his mind about obliterating the people. And your version might not phrase it that way. I actually don't think this is the greatest translation, but your translation might say that he relented concerning the harm. And I think that's a much better translation than he changed his mind. It's not that Moses' prayer and his intercession caused God to realize, you know what? I think I'm wrong for thinking that. So let me back up and change directions. That's not what happened here. But it's God's nature to be merciful. And the prayer of intercession, that entreaty that Moses was making to him, it was based on God's nature. And so when we understand God's very nature that he was imploring to, it's not that God changed his mind. Oh, I was wrong. I need to change my mind. It's that God, some of the warnings that he makes to his people are conditional based on what people will do as a response. And we see that throughout the scriptures here. And what a blessing that is as well, that God chooses mercy on the basis of people calling out to him. It's an amazing blessing that we have. Moses knows God's character and he appeals to it. It's not that Moses changed God's mind, it's that Moses appealed to God based on his character. And it was a conditional warning, and God relents. He relented from the harm that he was going to do. What an amazing blessing. And we'll also see that just because God doesn't obliterate them on the spot, there are still consequences for this sin. There are still going to be warnings, and there's still going to be evil that will be wiped out. This generation will never see the promised land. And that is a punishment that's brought on in part due to this as well. So Moses then, after the Lord relents concerning the harm, Moses goes back down the mountain, and he has the 2 tablets of stone in his hands, and they're written on front and back. And notice how precious these stones are in verse 16. These are precious. They were God's work. The writing was engraved by God. And notice the contrast in this chapter that we've seen. The golden calf was fashioned and engraved by Aaron, this idol, compared to these tablets that were engraved by God. Man, that's a contrast if I've ever heard of one. And so before they even get down to the camp, Joshua hears the sound of the camp, and he says that there must be a war going on. There must be a battle that's happening. But they realize this isn't a battle. This isn't a victory. This isn't defeat, but it's singing. So before they even get down to the camp, they can hear the revelry that's going on. It's not a small little group of people who are doing a couple small little bad things. This was something that they could hear from before they even got down to the camp. And that's so important for us to see. So before they even go down the mountain, God has told them what's going on. Moses knows that it's bad. They can hear them before they get down to the camp, but Moses hasn't seen it yet with his own eyes. He hasn't seen what's going on. He knows it's bad, but he hasn't seen it. So let's keep reading and see what happens before he sees it and then when he does. Look at verse 19. Verse 19, please. It came about as soon as Moses came near the camp that he saw the calf and the dancing, and Moses' anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands, and he shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf which they had made and burned it with fire and ground it into powder, and he scattered it over the surface of the water and made the sons of Israel drink it. Then Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you, that you have brought such great sin upon them?" Aaron said, "Do not let the anger of my Lord burn. You know the people yourself, that they're prone to evil. For they said to me, 'Make a god for us who will go before us.' For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. I said to them, 'Whoever has any gold, let them tear it off.' So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." We're going to talk about that, what he just said. But before they even go into the camp, if you notice at the beginning here in verse 19, it says, as soon as they came near to the camp, they're not even in it yet. Moses sees the calf and he sees the dancing. And this is not innocent dancing that isn't a problem at all, but it is a religious ceremony before this molten image where they are whirling ecstatically in this false worship before this idol. And it was just something that God would completely condemn. And Moses' anger burns, just like the Lord's anger had burned before. And he takes those precious tablets that have the writing of God on it, and he shatters them at the foot of the mountain. And this was not just a fit of rage. You know, he's mad at what he saw, although he's justified for that. But this is also a ceremonial image. These people had broken the covenant of God. They had shattered the covenant with their behavior and what they've been doing in the camp. And so Moses just shows that with the writing of the covenant, that it's shattered. That's done. We're done with this. And Moses shows it by breaking the tablets. And I really love his reaction because he burns down this golden calf. He grinds it into powder. He scatters the powder on the surface of the waters, and he makes them drink it. I mean, that is just as dramatic as you can get. He wants them to internalize literally the sin that they have just committed. They need to drink the waters of bitterness and know that they've been unfaithful to their God. This is a very dramatic scene. They taste this water of bitterness and know, I've been unfaithful to my God, been unfaithful. And Moses, notice, he doesn't accept anything that this was done maybe with good intentions. So let's just say on the most optimistic side possible, which I don't believe is right, but let's just say that every person in the camp was doing this in order to serve the one true God. They really thought what they were doing was right. Moses rejected every single bit of it. There's not one thing that he stepped back and say, well, I can see where you're coming from. I really appreciate that you did it this way. He completely and utterly rejects all of it. All of it's unauthorized and none of it is acceptable to God. Moses completely condemns this grievous evil. And then after that, by the way, it would have taken some time to melt down this calf, to grind it down, and then do. So I don't know what was going on during that whole time, but it would have taken some time for that to happen. But then Moses' attention is turned to Aaron. Remember, Moses specifically left Aaron and a man named Hur in charge of the people while he was at the top of the mountain. So he says in verse 21, what did this people do to you that you have brought this great sin upon them? What did they do to you? And Moses would understand more than anybody else the pressures of leading these people. And it seems like Aaron might be relating to that a little bit because he says, you know that they're prone to evil. You know that their minds are set on evil. You know that they're evil. And that's a true statement. Moses had all kinds of clashes with the people, but that's not really answering the question that Moses had been asking to him. And he gives just the lamest excuse in the world for this calf. He says, I threw the gold into the fire and out came this calf. And it just sounds like my 3-year-old after she's got stuff on her face. Just the worst excuse ever. But there is precedence in the ancient world for false god stories where it's sort of a miraculous, oh, this idol just popped out. And so maybe Aaron is alluding to one of those, or it could be that even Aaron knows how absolutely absurd it is that he shaped this golden calf and then told the people that this was their God. Maybe even he knows it's that absurd, and so he doesn't really want to address it. And we also know it's just completely untrue. Earlier we saw he had to melt it down. He had to fashion it with an engraving tool. It was work. It was labor to make this. It didn't just pop out. And so Aaron completely blames the people and refuses to take accountability for what's been going on. And we're going to notice a contrast between Aaron and Moses in just a minute. But Moses realizes Aaron had let the people loose. He wasn't a good leader. And so let's see what happens next. Look at verse 25. Verse 25, please. Now, when Moses saw that the people were out of control, for Aaron had let them get out of control to be a derision among their enemies, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered together to him. He said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, every man of you put his sword upon his thigh, go back and forth from gate to gate in the camp, kill every man his brother, every man his friend, and every man his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did as Moses instructed, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. Then Moses said, dedicate yourselves today to the Lord, for every man has been against his son and against his brother, in order that he may bestow a blessing upon you today. So Moses sees the people are out of control. They'd broken loose. Your translation might say they were running wild, and Aaron let them do that. And so it's time because Moses sees the enemies would be the enemies would see Israel's behavior and they would be a laughing stock to them. You're making us a derision even among our enemies. It's time to take action. It's time to cut out this evil, to stop this sin from continuing in the camp. And so, if you see, Moses calls all the people who belong to the Lord. Those who belong to the Lord, come to me. And sadly, it's only one tribe. Out of all 12, there's one tribe that comes to him, and it's the tribe of Levi. Now, that's Moses's and Aaron's family members. And so it's interesting that the Levites, maybe they hadn't engaged in this gross idolatry, but Aaron might not have gotten the memo because he sort of led them in this. And so it's just the Levites that come to him. And Moses says, go back and forth from gate to gate and slay the people. It's likely that this is to stop the sin from continuing in the camp, that this is what was necessary to get the sin to just stop for the day, get the sin to stop. And so about 3,000 men died that day. About 3,000 were killed in this. And Moses told the Levites, dedicate yourselves to the Lord to receive a blessing. This was a good thing that they did. As rough as it might sound to us, this was a good thing that they did. And amazingly, Aaron is not killed in this either. Aaron is sort of the one who led them in this, but he's the one who's going to be the high priest. Now, this is really intense. About 3,000 men died in this, 3,000 men, because the sin was continuing. One of the interesting things about this, 3,000, as awful as that slaughter is, because these 3,000 were likely the ones engaging in this gross idolatry, is that compared to the number of Israelites total, this is a pretty small number of people who were killed. And what I mean by that is there may have been 2 million people, 2 million Israelites at this time. And so God, just a few verses earlier, was ready to eradicate all of them except for Moses' line. And he relents from that. And here there is a judgment, physical death, physical judgment on these people. And Moses and the Levites would be right to just eradicate everybody. But if there's 1 million, 2 million people, and only about 3,000, I'm a nerd, I ran the numbers, this would be 0.15% to 0.3% of the people that were dead in this. And God would be completely just to eradicate all of them. So I think even in this physical death, this physical judgment, God's mercy is on clear display. Only about 3,000 people. So that means that 99.7 to 99.85% of the people who God was ready to wipe out were spared. So even in this judgment, God's mercy is just on clear display. And so we even get to see here that the next day, Moses is still concerned about the standing of these people before God. So let's finish out this chapter here. Look at verse 30 with me, please. Verse 30. On the next day, Moses said to the people, "You yourselves have committed a great sin, and now I am going up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people has committed a great sin. They have made a god of gold for themselves. But now, if you will, forgive their sin. And if not, please blot me out from your book, which you have written." The Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. But go now, lead the people where I told you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I punish, I will punish them for their sins." Then the Lord smote the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron had made. So the next day, Moses lets the people know. It seems like the slaughter of the previous day was to just get the sin to stop. And so then the next day, he lets them know again, this is wrong. I'm going to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for you. Maybe, because he's completely just in wanting all of them dead. But perhaps I can go make atonement for you to restore this relationship. So Moses goes up to the mountain, and Moses prays, and he asks God to forgive the people. And notice what he says after that. "Please forgive them. And if not, blot me out of your book instead of them." So this is huge. Moses has had run-ins with the people. They've had clashes. Moses has just had a serious clash with the people. And he still, in leading this group of people, goes to God and says, "Forgive them. And if you won't, blot me out instead of them." He offers himself up in their place of these unworthy people. They don't deserve any of this. But Moses is willing to offer himself. And now, where Aaron, if you notice this contrast, Aaron blamed everything on the people, maybe to make himself look better. Moses was willing to give himself up for the betterment of these unworthy people. It's a huge contrast. God's response, though, is one that those who have sinned against me, those are the ones who will be blotted out from my book. God emphasizes personal accountability and personal responsibility for sins. You don't bear the sins of other people. You bear the sins of your own. And God tells Moses to lead the people again. But in the day that I punish, I will punish them. And then it says that there was a plague. Then it says that the Lord smote the people for what they had done. And so it's possible that this is a plague, or that this is referring to where none of that evil, adulterous generation got to enter into the promised land. Either way, God's justice is served either way. So Moses here intercedes on behalf of the people. He mediates on behalf of the people, and he offers himself up for them. But God doesn't take his life. He doesn't require Moses' life for the people. The intercession of Moses to God's character saves the people from an immediate and just physical punishment. Saves the people from that. This is a wonderful passage. And this is one of those Bible class stories, or stories that maybe you teach to your kids and that we know. But as we get older, there's a whole lot more to it than just the Bible class version that maybe we learn. And where we may not view ourselves in modern times as worshiping idols in the same way that they did then, to bring this to us today, I just want to say that we absolutely have modern day idols. It might not look like a calf or a young bull, but we have modern day idols. Anything that takes priority in our lives other than God becomes an idol. Anything that takes God's rightful place becomes an idol to us. For us, it could be money. It could be materialism, where we trust in our financial security and on our wealth more than we trust in God for security and peace of mind. It could be in video games or entertainment, where we depend on player rank or likes or online approval for meaning, rather than looking to our God for meaning. It could be ourselves and our own autonomy, where we make our own desires, our own feelings, our own mental health, and our own identity the highest authority beyond anything else, rather than God being the highest authority for everything. It could be relationships, where we look to other people for meaning, whether it's our spouses, our kids, or our friends, to give us what only God can truly give to us when we put them in the place of God. It could be success, our work, our career lives, where we define ourselves by our career, our achievements, our promotions, our salary number, rather than the God who has led us so far. Or it could be comfort or pleasure or addictions that we have in our lives where we're looking for things to fill us with what only God can do. Only God can. And they're all so easy and they're all so sneaky to just fall right into. We all do it at some point or another because just like the Israelites, we have the same impulses. We have the same impulses that those Israelites did. So think about this with me. What drew the Israelites away after seeing all of these amazing wonders and signs and hearing the voice of God? Well, the first one, they grew impatient. When Moses didn't come down from the mountain, I guess when they wanted him to, they grew impatient. And if they had just waited for God's timing, none of this would have happened. And it would have gone so well for them. And so for us, we can also get impatient with God's timing on things. And we try to make things happen for ourselves. We want those quick fixes. We want the money now. We want career success now. We want the pleasure now. We want the relationships now. And we don't trust in the Lord and his timing rather than trying to make everything happen ourselves. Another impulse that they had that I think we share is they wanted something visible. They wanted something manageable that they could see, they could touch, they could feel, that they could manage and control. And we may want a God that fits our preferences, that fits what we can control, that we can see, that we can touch, that we can feel. Maybe we like certain sections of the Bible. Well, I really like the God's love sections, but I don't necessarily like the holy living section that much. Or maybe I really like what I get from God, but I don't necessarily like what I need to give and who I need to be. But also, the Israelites wanted to return to something they had previous experience with. If you think about the bull worship that was taking place in Egypt, they would have been familiar with that. And so they're returning to something that was familiar. And so for us, we can be set free from the sin in our lives, and yet we realize the temptations, the desires, the challenges, the things that we face in our old lifestyle, they don't just miraculously go away. We still have to face them. And so then we can let those things take the place of God and fall right back into the former lifestyle that we were in before. And then the last one that we definitely see from Exodus 32 is the Israelites tried to disguise idol worship as worship to Yahweh. They tried to disguise this false worship as if it were going to Yahweh. Remember, Aaron said, tomorrow is a feast day for the Lord, for Yahweh, and yet it was completely and totally unauthorized. No amount of good intentions will ever make it right if it's unauthorized by God. For us, it might be that our idol is our career, and we might say things like, well, I'm just providing for my family. God says, if I don't provide for my family, then I'm worse than an unbeliever. Or maybe it's our mental health where it's holding us back. And we say, well, I need to figure it out first before I devote myself to God. And if we just look at the words that we just said, I first, then God, we have put ourselves in the place of God and made ourselves an idol. We have the same impulses as the Israelites. And because of both of these things, just like the Israelites here in Exodus 32, we also need a mediator. We need a mediator. Here, the Israelites, God had every right to eradicate them on the spot for their sins and their false, gross idolatry. And we might think that maybe our sins aren't as bad as theirs or other people, or, I'm a pretty good person, but that really just shows we have an unbiblical view of sin itself and the condemning, evil, atrocious nature of any sin that any of us have committed. And when we realize that, we need help. We can't do it on our own. We will never be enough on our own. We will never do enough to be enough on our own. And so we need a mediator. Moses was a pretty good mediator for the people of Israel. He offered himself up in the place of those unworthy people, but God did not require his life for it. You compare that to our mediator, the Lord Jesus Christ. He did offer himself up. He did take our sins on himself so that we might live, and we are completely unworthy sinners, and yet we have access to eternal life only because of Jesus. And so this morning, this is a pretty heavy thing from a Bible class story that maybe we teach to our kids. But are there idols in your life that you need to get rid of, that you need to eradicate, cut out, melt it down, grind it into powder, scatter it on the water, and drink it like Moses. I encourage you to do that today. And so as we close this morning, if you want to learn about our mediator, we'd love to study with you. But if you're ready to cut those idols out and give your life completely to Jesus, we'd love to assist you with that. We've got water. We'd love to assist you with that. But if you've become a Christian before, but those sneaky idols have crept their way back to taking God's place, and you want to make that right this morning, there's an opportunity today. While together we stand and while we sing.